Hello. Today's topic is why executive function skills are as important as math and reading. This PowerPoint was put together by the Office of Head Start. I adapted it to include examples of strategies applicable to school-age children on those specific pages. Those slides are mine. Participants will understand what executive functions are, why they're important, connect them to learning frameworks and standards, learn strategies to help children develop and improve their executive functions. Executive functioning, the skills needed to execute, learn, and live productively. The deficits are found in many populations of children with language disorders that we would interact with. What are executive functions? This is important. Brain functions that are used to manage attention. So can the child pay attention to a task while they're trying to learn it? Control emotions and pursuit of goals. Can they stick with something long enough to complete a task? It emerges during the preschool years, but does not fully mature until early adulthood. In the case of ADHD, we see really delayed development. It starts to, become more mature at about age 30, and you see a corresponding drop in crime. It's more predictive of school success than IQ. That ability to focus and finish a task is more important than how smart you are. These executive functions are cognitive control abilities that develop in the prefrontal cortex, or the green area. Okay, so this is the front part of the frontal lobe. It's a brain region that's implicated in paying attention, organizing, and planning. So if you have kids that have difficulty organizing anything to write, organizing their homework, planning an assignment, initiating and staying focused on tasks, regulating emotions, decision making, self-monitoring. So using language to talk to yourself and decide if you're being appropriate or not, and to stop yourself. So these are all of these executive function responsibilities. Cognitive control functions that are involved in goal-oriented behaviors. This fight or flight instinct. So the fight instinct is very automatic and reactive. You don't stop to think about the consequences, and you engage in impulsive responses. So you see something and you just grab it, and you don't pay attention to whether you're going to get in trouble or not. You have something on your mind and you blurt it out, even if it's inappropriate. You see something that you don't like, a person's wearing something you don't like, and you blurt it out rather than think about the consequences, as opposed to the flight or the reflexive, stopping to think about the consequences or acting in the most goal-oriented manner. Okay, core executive functions. So the core, or the basic ones, are inhibitory control or self-control. Do you have that ability to stop, think through the consequences, stay with a task? Working memory and cognitive flexibility. So we'll be talking about these three main core executive functions. Higher order executive functions include problem solving, reasoning, and planning. So you're going to see, if you've got a person that has difficulty with self-control and working memory and cognitive flexibility, that they're going to be weak in problem solving, reasoning, planning. The ability to resist a strong inclination to do one thing, so that fight reflex, and instead do what is most appropriate or needed, is part of this inhibitory control, also called self-control or effortful control. So you see something and you just impulsively grab it. You hear something and you impulsively talk about it or impulsively react to it. Instead of doing what's most appropriate or needed, stay focused and complete your assignment. Resisting acting on impulse. Staying focused on what's important. Selective or focused attention as opposed to reactive attention to everything in the environment. Self-control. Think before you act. Resist temptation. Avoid jumping to conclusions. So do you stop and reflect? Effortful control and attention. Focusing your attention. Shifting your attention appropriately. Inhibitory control. Don't react immediately, but stop and think through the consequences. So you see this chess player, and he has to shift to focus to his turn, the other person's turn, focus attention, and not just make the first move. You have to stop and think and plan and organize. Here's some examples. A child is engaged in one project and it's time to clean up and start something else. So this is going to be shifting your attention. If you can't do that very well, then you're going to throw a temper tantrum, you're going to get upset. A child has a task to do, such as set the table as a helper, but cannot stay attentive to the task because every time he sees a toy he likes, he or she is distracted. A child who is accidentally bumped by another child automatically responds by hitting or pushing back. Always the fight response rather than the flight or reflection response. Inhibitory control is self-discipline. Persistence, seeing a task through to completion even when it's tedious or difficult. Being able to stay focused despite distractions and continuing to work through the reward, though the reward might be a long time coming. These are so typical of language disordered kids to be weak in these things. So as soon as you get the task gets a little bit difficult or a little bit redundant, then they just want to quit. They're done with it. They get distracted by other people in the classroom and noises in the classroom and nearly anything. And then they need an immediate reward in order to stay focused. Most of us, when the paper is done, we get our big reward. But for these kids, getting a sentence done, and may be enough time for them to need a reward in order to keep going. So it's a real problem. Evidence shows that discipline accounts for over twice as much variance in the final grade as does IQ, even in college. So basically, that self-discipline, that ability to stay focused, to keep the prize in your mind long term, all of those kinds of things are so difficult for people with executive function disorders. So IQ is not as strong a predictor of who's going to do well as that executive function is. So, interventions for inhibitory or self-control or effortful control. Point systems are a very appropriate way to do that. They provide an external cue that the child can use to monitor his or her own behavior. So they're not using language to monitor their own behavior and to keep themselves on task. They're just responding to what's out there in the environment. So you put out there in the environment a point system so that they can be monitoring that as an external cue. You can add points, so they gain points for appropriate behaviors and subtract points when inappropriate behaviors are shown. Or you can do the opposite and add points for inappropriate behavior so that you catch them every time there's an inappropriate behavior. And that's the one I'm more likely to use. The thing about it is you have to be consistent and immediate. No second chances. So you don't sit there and go, oh, if you do that again, I'm going to give you a point. No. You give them the point the minute the behavior happens. No negotiating. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this if you do that. The point system is just immediate and it's consistent, because when you give them second chances or when you negotiate and argue with them, it's like gambling. The child wins, not every time, but they win often enough, and that just increases the inappropriate behavior. It puts you on that irregular reinforcement schedule, and so you never know when you're going to get the reinforcement. So it has to be consistent and immediate. Every time there's an inappropriate behavior, you get a point. Be firm and use words to cue when the behaviors are inappropriate. The child has to, you're being the child's executive function for them. So the words that you put in their minds when you're doing this are the words that they're going to start telling themselves. So you're just going to be firm, not mean, but firm, and use the words to cue when the behaviors are inappropriate. And then when they are doing the appropriate behavior, then your whole manner changes. Your voice becomes happy. You have this effusive praise. You're so excited for them, and you can, reward them in the point system. So have either a positive or negative consequence that will result in losing or gaining points. So if you get this many points, you can get a sticker. Or if you get this many points taken away, then you have to stand in the corner. So basically there has to be some stake in the game. So this is just an example. I'm going to draw 10 blank lines. Each time you forget to pay attention or act silly, you will get a point. If you get 10 points, you will need to stand in the corner. If you have fewer than 5 points when we are done, and then I'll draw a slash, you can pick a sticker. That means you really paid attention. Child jumps up to see what another child is doing. 1 point immediately. Uh-oh, you got a point. Don't lose your sticker. And you remind them of the goal. Child starts to argue and negotiate. That's not fair. What did I do? Another point immediately. You got another point. Turn to page 3 and let's begin reading. So you tell them what the appropriate behavior is. I don't want to read. Child's negotiating. Another point. Now you have 3 points. Don't lose your sticker. Look, you only have 1 point left and you're going to lose your sticker. Don't lose your sticker. Turn to page 3 and you tell them what you want them to do. Child turns to page 3 and begins reading. Adult turns very positive and attentive to the child. Remark on what the child has read. Oh, I hope Harry doesn't get lost. So you respond to what the child is now doing in that very positive, interested way, giving him your full attention. After 3 positive turns at reading, the adult says, I like the way you're paying attention and I will erase a point. You're doing so much better. I'm proud of you. Okay, so basically it gives this child this external warning. Uh-oh, I'm getting close to the place where I'm going to lose something I want. And then when the child is paying attention and doing all the appropriate things that are helping him learn, then you reward him by taking one of those points away. So that's a point system. Another thing that you can do is to give the child these external self-regulation messages. So when you are self-regulating, when you're engaging in self-regulation and self-control, what do? Well, you stop and then you think. And then you consider all of the information that's important. And then you decide what's the correct thing to do. And then you get the consequences. So for example, the child begins to rush through assignments or gives up without trying. And you use the visual cue. Did I think before I answered or acted? Think about it. Let's stop and think. Did I pay attention to all of the important information? Did I understand why my answer was correct or incorrect? And what are the consequences for the wrong choice and the right choice? Okay, so you begin to rush through the assignment or give up without trying, and so it's like, well, let's look for the information. Let's stop and think about it. What information do we need to do the next step? What do I need to, start my paper? And then did I pay attention to all of the important information? So did I, go through and find some notes and things that I needed? Do I understand why my answer, my action was correct or incorrect? Did you figure out what you needed to put down? Do you know why? And then what are the consequences? Look, we've got a whole paragraph written. Or, honey, you went through that, you just wrote down anything, and so now we have to start again. So these visual cues are very important to that process. Another visual cue is just stop and go. Giving the child a stop sign or a go sign, that you need to stop what you're engaged in and go over to the assignment, go back to your page, go back to whatever. So sometimes, just you pointing to a stop sign or a go sign gives the child that external reminder of what his own brain is supposed to be doing. His own brain is supposed to be using self-regulation to either stop this task and go on to this task, or stop getting distracted by those other things and go back to your goal and stay goal-oriented. This one we use in reading. There's 3 kinds of answers. So some of the answers are right here answers. What did Goldilocks eat? And it tells you right in the story that she ate porridge. So the answer is right here. Sometimes you have to draw an inference. Goldilocks was sleeping in Papa Bear's bed. There she is, growled Papa Bear. So how does Papa Bear feel? Well, it doesn't tell you how Papa Bear feels, so you have to read between the lines. If she's in his bed and he's growling and pointing at her and yelling, there she is, then he probably doesn't feel happy. He probably feels mad. And then what is porridge is one that you have to have the background information in your head, or you have to go to some sort of a resource for that information. So you have to look it up in a dictionary, or you have to, find a picture on the internet. So basically those answers can only be responded to if you get more information or use your background knowledge. And then the other choice is too much information and irrelevant information. And that's when the child just brain dumps all kinds of information. One time I had porridge and it didn't taste very good, and I don't really like porridge, but I like cereal, and the cereal I like best. And so now it's like, stop, stop, stop. That's all irrelevant. It's too much information, and it's all irrelevant information. So we need to sit back and think about, our answer over here. Okay. That's just an explanation of those things. Okay. Being able to, so summary, inhibitory control, what is it? Being able to stay focused despite distraction, stay on task and complete the task even in the face of temptation or frustration, exercise self-control by considering a response before acting, controlling your behavior, responses, and language. And again, using external visual cues when the child can't do it for themselves internally is a way to teach the child the stepping stones to thinking through things before reacting to things. This works with any age, from kindergarten, maybe even preschool, through adulthood. Basically, people can learn to improve. This is their neurology, and you're not going to fix their neurology, but you're giving them strategies that they can use to improve their own ability to inhibit and control their own actions. Working memory. Working memory is the ability to hold information in your mind while mentally working with it or while working on something else. Following a conversation while formulating what you want to say. So keeping both sides in focus. ADHD people will cue often on the first thing a person says, and they're already planning their message and don't listen to the end of what the other person is saying. Remember where something was hidden despite a delay or distraction before you get back to it. Holding in mind what happened earlier and relating it to what's happening now. Relating one idea to another. Relating what you read earlier to what you're learning now. This can be within the context of a book. that you learned something on page 2 and now we're on page 4, and it's important to remember what happened on page 2 in order to interpret page 4. So that's why I love working on language through literacy, because I've got the ability to just turn back 2 pages and reread it and tie it into the idea on page 4. In oral language, you just can't do it. The information is long gone. So written language just really offers us this wonderful opportunity to work on these kinds of things. Understanding cause and effect. The same thing. You can use that textbook too, a textbook or a reading book, to basically look at one event and the cause that it's having, the cause of the effect that's now occurring on some later event. And I love books and print because it allows you to make those connections back and forth by rereading an earlier thing that was a cause on the current effect. Working memory also, critical ability to see connections between unconnected things, seemingly unconnected things, which is critical to creativity. The ability to take apart and reassemble elements or thoughts in new ways. That's basically what studying is. You learn about syntax, you learn about morphology, you learn about story grammar, you learn about these different types of things. We take them apart and talk about, oh, there's different stages, there's different ways of approaching it, etc. And then you have to reassemble it in new thoughts or new ways in order to do intervention. So now I've got this child in front of me who has these multiple problems, and so what can I do in intervention that will address, now that I know developmentally about where he is, that will address those issues in some sort of a holistic activity like reading or writing. Okay, strategies for improving working memory. Break tasks into step-by-step instructions and have the child repeat them back. So we talk about running it through your own system. All right, so yeah, we need to write a story about bears. So what's the first thing we need to do? Look at the graphic organizer. What do we need to do next? We need to, see the connected ideas and put them into a sentence. All right, then what do we need to do? Then we need to, take our sentence and write it down and make sure that, the spelling is right and the grammar is right and all of those different things are right. So basically the things that we've used, like graphic organizers and storyboards and the syntax PowerPoint and all of those things, do this. They break the task into step-by-step instructions for how to do something, and then you have the child either repeat it back verbally, repeat it back by writing it, repeat it back by rereading it. If you had to break down a complex syntactic sentence while you're reading that the kids didn't understand, and then you ask them to reread it. So getting them to reread something and repeat it allows them to run it through their own system and put it back together again. So it can be step-by-step instructions for basically anything, but that process of having the child understand the steps and showing you they understand the steps by repeating the information back to you or repeating the steps back to you is very critical to helping them develop the ability to do that independently. Give the child outline of the lessons, just like I give you my PowerPoints, so that you can go back and look at the parts that you need to explore in more detail. If you didn't get everything written down exactly right, that's basically what the kids need too. They need some sort of an outline of a lesson to go back to. So the graphic organizer is as a nice outline of a lesson. Have a daily routine that doesn't change. When you're having difficulty organizing and planning and figuring out how to do complex problems, problem solving, etc., the more that some things stay the same, the more a chance you have to learn new things. So make the familiar things routine and automatic, and make the new things something that you have to attend to and not change. Okay, give a short review before teaching a new skill. A lot of you do this before reading. All right, where were we when we last, we're talking about Henry. What was he doing and what happened? Use the storyboard. I tried to model that for people. Use the storyboard. Just don't go off of a sort of a whatever you remember kind of thing. Teach the children to use the kind of thinking that's going to help them organize and plan. So when you ask for a review, who are the characters in this episode? Where were they? What were they doing? Then what happened? And that created a problem. And how were they going to solve it? You've got to get those kinds of structures in your own thoughts in order to improve in organizing and planning things. And those kinds of external structures like a visual storyboard or a visual graphic organizer helps the child see it and see it and see it and start to internalize it. Post schedules and directions. Highlight keywords and ideas. So when you've got some assignment to do, you can even use a highlighter and highlight keywords or ideas. Okay, so first we're going to write about the characters in the setting, and we're going to give them a name, and we're going to talk about something about them so that we know a little bit about our character. So you can, use highlighters. Help child break down a big task into smaller pieces. So we do it for them in the intervention, and eventually we need to turn that task more over to them for them to do it independently. So even having them verbalize, all right, we're going to write a story. What are the things we need to do? And have them start to break down the big task into smaller pieces. Help the child mark deadlines in an assignment notebook. So learning to keep assignment notebooks, calendars, and other types of external organizers. Lists of things that need to get done, lists of things that you need to have with you to complete something, using those external organizers to help working memory. Okay, and again, a checklist is what we were just talking about. All right, other working memory strategies. Visualization skills. Encourage the child to create a picture in his mind of what is read or what is heard or what needs to get done. So a lot of the children with language disabilities are visual learners, especially ADHD kids, dyslexic kids. So basically they think in pictures, so children with autism. So you need to encourage them to create a picture of what it is that they just read or what it is that they just heard or what it looks like when they've finished the assignment or what it looks like when they're taking the steps to finish an assignment. So they have that visual memory. What did the story characters do or think? Get a picture of what they were doing. What do you look like when you're doing the task correctly? What does the end product look like? Okay, what steps? Picture yourself taking the steps to finishing the task. Now, get a picture of in your head of what it looks like to be finished. So what steps do you have to take to write this paper? And what is the paper going to look like? What parts do you see in that paper when you're all done with the paper? How many paragraphs is it? What does your handwriting look like? So basically helping them visualize what the process and the goal look like. Use drawing to help the child learn to visualize. So I've encouraged lots and lots of drawing, drawing out sentences, drawing out the meaning in the story, drawing out what the characters look like when they're talking. Have the child convert the pictures into words. So that's part of a famous program, the Linda Mood Bell Visualizing and Verbalizing program. They talk a lot about helping the children convert pictures into words and words back into pictures. So having those two symbolic systems overlap each other and exchanging information, because that's going to help use the child's strength to put information into memory and using the child's weakness to refer to their strength. So if your strength is visualizing, then you put the information into visual memory, and then you use language to talk about and organize what you see in that visual memory. Visualizing, verbalizing. There should be an article on Linda Mood Bell in the Moodle. Have the child teach the skill to another person. Anytime you have to teach something to anybody else, you learn twice as much. So it's going to be the same for kids. If they have to, if you've helped them figure out something and then they have to explain it to another person, then that helps them reorganize the information, put the information into words, put the information in sequence. Active reading. Highlight or add sticky notes to important information. So learning how to take notes. Talking about information and asking questions as we do in communicative reading. We basically, talk about the information and then we make the kids problem solve and reflect on that information. Well, do you think that was a good idea? What could happen if, he let the dog out? I know the dog wanted to get out. What other ways could he have given the dog a chance to run outside without running away? So basically all of those kinds of higher level questions that ask for inferences and evaluations and, predictions. Use graphic organizers, go charts and storyboards to organize information. As I said, anything that you can externalize, that they can see outside of themselves, that is like what you want them to see inside their own thoughts. So instead of random ideas, you want them to start to see information organized into these trees of information, from a topic to a subtopic, subtopic to main ideas to details. And that's both in expository information and narrative information. Teach children to use mnemonics to aid memory. So whether they're silly words that correspond to something or visual mnemonics, there's a lot of information on the internet about mnemonics. Some people have these things like a man driving down the truck with something in the bed of the truck, and you relate a new situation. So Jimmy Johns was, in the front seat of the classroom, and what did he have in the bed? He had brought some baby chicks to class. Anyway, so basically you're taking the mnemonic picture and then you're associating new events with the same sequence of things that occurred in the car scene. Look him up on the internet. Connect new information to old information. Oh, that's kind of like X. That's kind of like this. Scaffolding. Okay. We've talked about scaffolding. I wanted you to be abundantly aware of how many levels there are of ways that you can scaffold, from not at all, the child cannot do anything at all by themselves, to the child can do it all by themselves. So I've made this little demonstration of how, if the child can't do this and they're sitting there unable to start, they can't initiate the task, they can't stay focused on the task, they're not getting anywhere on the task. It's like, well, there's a lot of distance between that and being able to do it by myself. So I said there's at least a dozen levels of support for any task. You have to be in the child's ZPD. So if this is not in the child's ZPD, then you have to find the place along the continuum that is in the child's ZPD, and that's the level of support you have to give. Otherwise, they won't attempt the task, or they'll give up quickly, disengage, start arguing with you, causing trouble, crying, whatever. So here's an example of writing a story. Level 12, by myself, the child spontaneously writes a story independently. They don't need a graphic organizer or anything because they've got all that organization already in their head, and they just start writing and doing a nice job of writing a story. Number 11, the child needs that external cue to keep them organized when they're writing the story, but they can create their own graphic organizer or their own storyboard and write the story independently. So now we're at 11. 10. The child has help with graphic organizer. So you help the child form the graphic organizer or the storyboard, and then the child is able to write the story. 9. With a Go chart or a storyboard and prompts to add each part, the child writes the story. All right, let's look at our graphic organizer. Let's look at our storyboard. We're at the, very beginning of the story. We need to have a character, which means we need to give him a name. We need to, have the place where he is and the time. So how would you put that into a sentence? So you're giving them prompts, but the child writes the story. Number 8, child arranges a sequence of pictures with prompts or writes a story. So this is basically where we are now using one picture for each part of the story. And you're asking the child to sequence the pictures. So you give them a set of pictures, they sequence them, and with prompts writes the story. 8, the adult arranges the sequence of pictures and prompts each part of the story. So if the child can't quite arrange the sequence of pictures yet to tell a logical story, then you have to teach them how to do that. So with them, you're arranging the sequence of pictures and talking about why this picture comes first, and then this picture, and then this picture. And in the meantime, you're prompting them to write parts of the story that go along with that. 6, so you do everything that's in 7. You help them figure out the sequence and talk about the sequence and have them tell you which one they think goes first, and you talk about it until it makes a logical story. Plus the adult and child write every other sentence. So if you've got the child that now won't do the writing, then try to have the child write every other sentence. Okay, I'll write a sentence and then you write a sentence. And that sometimes takes off enough of the pressure and the burden that they're willing to try that because they don't see the task as so overwhelming. 5, you do everything in 7, plus the adult writes a sentence but leaves words for the child to fill in. So that's cloze, C-L-O-Z-E, procedure. So you're basically transcribing what the child is telling you about the story, and you're leaving just a few words. You can start out with just leaving one word in a sentence for them to fill in, and then pretty soon 2 and 3 words for them to fill in, and then eventually you get to the place where they'll write the whole sentence. Down here at 4, so we're getting closer to the child not being able to do it at all by themselves. The child dictates the sentences and the adult acts as a scribe, so they don't have to engage in the writing part at all. You're transcribing their talk. Number 3, the adult helps the child form 3 sentences from pictures. The child puts them in order, and then the adult writes. So the child has to dictate 3 sentences and then also put them in order. 2, the adult tells the story to the child, so this time the child can't see the story at all, and so you tell a story to the child and then ask the child to retell the story, and then you write down the child's retelling. And finally, 1, the adult presents a single picture, asks questions, and writes the child's answer. So at this point it's not a story unless you ask questions that guide it into a story. So basically it's all the way from the child has no ability to do the task and they're just completely disengaged, and so you would present a single picture, ask questions, and then write the child's answer. So the child is, basically participating on a very minimal verbal level. And then you tell the story and ask the child to retell. Oh, I see a story in my picture, so I'll tell you the story, and then you retell the story, and then you write down their story. And then you move up to 3, where, okay, now you need to look at the picture and tell me 3 sentences from the picture and put them in order, and I'll write it down. Okay, then you get into basically where the child now is having to come up with the story more independently when you're in level 7, when they have to sequence the pictures and um, start to tell the story as a sequenced story, and the adult writes down the information, describes it. So anyway, there's never a place where the child can't participate at all. You just have to keep constantly breaking it down. Use your executive functions to break the task into simpler and simpler pieces that still engage the child in moving toward accomplishing the task. And in so doing, you're teaching the child how to think through it, what strategies you can use, what external support you look for. So you're helping them acquire those executive functions. Okay, engaging parents. This is from the Head Start. We're back to the Head Start information. So they were talking about anything that the parents can do at home, like Little Simon Says game, that you have to remember the sequence that the lights came on. So any of those kinds of things, fun things that you can do at home to improve working memory, playing matching games, concentration, those things. Next topic, cognitive flexibility, which leads to creativity. So the ability to easily and quickly switch perspectives with your focus of attention. Flexibility is adjusting to change demands or priorities and being able to think creatively. Thinking about ways to solve problems that no one else has considered before, which is what we basically, call imagination. It's what we call the ability to, create. It's research. It's, any of those higher level things where you don't just do things because you've learned how to do them. You do things by combining information from past experiences and new information in order to solve a problem in a new way. Ability to change course when what you are doing isn't working. So they always talk about, if you do it the same way, you're going to get the same results. Don't be surprised. The ability to adapt to change easily. And again, some of our populations of kids, such as kids with autism, etc., these are some of the things that they have the greatest amount of difficulty doing. And, most of the kids with disabilities get very frustrated and don't know how to change and get out of the pattern, or even that they should. Ability to take advantage and seize opportunities when they arise, even if it means changing course. If you're locked into that routine and this is the way I do it, and you get upset every time something changes, it's going to be hard to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. Okay, we use lots of, strategies for cognitive flexibility during reading. We ask higher level questions. What does it mean when he says X? What does he do? Why did he do Y? What do you think they should do next? Okay, so you're building in that not only what happened, but what does it mean? Or why did they do it? Or what happens next? What will the consequences be? Should he have done that? So all of those things where you take the facts, but you have to think about them differently. And you have to think about how to use that information to problem solve. We also scaffold by pointing to information in the text across sentences, paragraphs, and pages to help the child put the relevant information together. So remember back over here on page 4 when he said that Mudge, didn't like the water, and now he's all muddy and smiling and licking everybody. So how come? What happened? Encourage possible answers or interpretations. That's that imagination or creativity. So what else could he do? What do you think he's going to do? Would you do it that way? Encourage explanations. Why do you think that's what they will do? So get them to, put those ideas together. Can you tell me from other parts in the story why you think that Henry would do it that way? Contradict an answer that they provide with evidence. But here it says this, so could that be right? Do you think that could be right? Because it says right here. So basically contradict their thinking so that they have to rethink about it in a new way, that cognitive flexibility. You can do the same thing in writing. So you have been working, when you work through a curriculum of reading and writing, if you scaffold correctly, you are addressing so many of the executive functions that these kids need. Writing strategies for cognitive flexibility. Engage in higher level writing such as compare and contrast or problem solution. And you can have problem solutions in stories as well as expository text. Help the child take information from multiple sources to build a graphic organizer with 2 features. So if you go back to the PowerPoint on expository discourse, you'll see compare and contrast, and you'll also see problem solution. So these are 2 of the higher level writing activities that make the children engage in cognitive flexibility. You write about how 2 similar things, black bears and sun bears, are both alike and different. And you're talking about how they solve their problems differently. So where does one of them get the food? Where does the other one get the food? Where does, I don't know, different habitats. We have one on gorillas and chimps. The gorillas build their nests on the ground because they're, heavy animals, while the chimps build their nests up in trees because they need to have protection from other things that eat them. So basically, how are those things alike and how are they different? So that's cognitive flexibility, where you have to consider both similarities and differences, or both a problem and the possible solutions. Write about how problems are created and solutions are developed. Include higher level thinking such as evaluations. Which solution is the most earth-friendly? So we've got 2 possible solutions, but which one is most earth-friendly? Why are executive functions important? School readiness, more than IQ or entry level. Reading is important for school success. So basically readiness meaning those executive functions. Can you pay attention? Can you stay focused? School success, working memory and inhibitory control independently predict both math and reading competence throughout the school years. So it's not one or the other, it's basically both. That working memory will predict how you're going to do in reading and math, and inhibitory control is going to predict how well you're going to do in reading and math. And poor executive function skills lead to poor productivity on the job and difficulty finding and keeping a job. So it's not just what happens to these individuals in school, but it's a lifelong problem if we don't help these kids to develop this ability to stay focused and to organize information and to finish a task and, do the kinds of things that they need to do. They're critical for cognitive, social, and psychological development. You're going to have more difficulty maintaining a marriage. You're not going to have very many friends. You're going to, frustrate people with poor executive function. So high-functioning people with autism, for example, might be brilliant at a very high-functional job, engineering or accounting, but they might not keep the job because their social skills are so poor. Executive function in poverty. Children in poverty are susceptible to cumulative risk. So they've got more negative life stress, they've got poor access to health care, they've got more mental health and substance abuse problems in the home, and they have poor housing, and there's no quiet space, and there's, guns going on, gunshots going off in the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, there's just so many things that are piling up to result in difficulty with executive functions. And these also have a lasting impact into adulthood because they disrupt the neurobiological systems, especially self-regulation systems. If life is not predictable, it's hard to be self-regulated. It's hard to organize yourself and plan. If you're always moving, if you're always, there's different people moving in and all of those different kinds of things that create chaos stack against you in terms of developing good self-regulation skills. Children in lower socioeconomic families evidence lower levels of effortful control. Parental behaviors that would support those behaviors are observed less, so parents aren't modeling effortful control. Parents are still in fight or flight. Parents, themselves haven't been helped to develop these inhibitory mechanisms or these abilities to stay on task and give up, basically. And then you don't teach them to your children. We talked about vocabulary development and how the middle class sits there and talks about all of these problem-solving things while you're just washing your hands. Climb up on the stool so you don't fall off. Problem solution. Turn the water on warm to wash off all the germs, but not too hot or you'll get burned. And that's not occurring in the homes of many of the children of poverty. It also starts in infancy when parents bounce, talk to, and in other ways distract a crying infant until food is ready. It's like, oh, why are you crying? Look. Uh-oh, look at the lights. Uh-oh, look at the pretty puppy. Look at the pretty colors. And you're doing all of these, talking and cooing things to try to get the child to calm down. And you're basically interrupting that fight reflex. Instead of just screaming reflexively, you do all of these soothing kinds of things in order to basically help the child wait longer for the reward. And so basically you're teaching that self-regulation, that you can calm down and you can wait a little bit longer by putting in this pleasurable event before gratification comes. And so you learn that long-term gratification even as an infant in the crib. Research indicates that about half of the effects of poverty on early childhood relate to the family and parenting factors. So if we can promote effective parenting and family functioning in early childhood, we may also improve the child's chance of continuing with lifelong problems. And then when we get them in school, we can basically also have an impact through our interventions. If we basically engage the child in these higher level activities like reading good children's literature and writing meaningful passages that give them a chance to practice all of these executive function skills while at the same time learning strategies for organization and pattern and planning and understanding how language works to communicate all of this information and how we can use language in our own heads to help us to behave in ways that are more appropriate. We can see the bad consequences in a story when you don't do when you don't use your executive functions to plan and think ahead and think through the consequences, and we can talk about how they could have, prevented making those mistakes. The bad news continues. Executive functions and mental health. There's an increase of executive function problems in addictions, ADHD, depression, conduct disorder, schizophrenia. All of them show severely impaired executive functions. Children with more self-control, more impulsive, less persistent, poor attention to regulation have worse health. They earn less and they commit more crimes as adults 30 years later. So again, that just continues throughout the lifespan. 46% of kindergarten teachers reported at least half of the children in their classrooms have problems following directions. So again, speech pathologists working with kindergarten teachers to come up with strategies to help the children follow directions. I think I gave you the example of the teacher that was trying to get the kids line up. It was on one of our PowerPoints, line up at the bus. And she just kept saying, if you're in the red group, line up at the bus. stay behind this line until I call your group. Well, the problem wasn't that the kids weren't following directions. They didn't understand the directions. So we visualized the directions, we, broke it down into steps, and then the children, followed the directions. So basically, the teacher has to understand what's going wrong and how to problem solve in order to help the kids develop better ability to follow directions, which is an executive function. Head Start teachers in another study reported that more than a quarter of their students exhibited serious self-control related negative behaviors. So basically they were hitting each other and pushing and doing all of these flight or fight behaviors, and they needed to be able to calm down and do some thinking through to the consequences and alternative ways they could behave. Point system is one way of doing that. Drawing pictures of what you look like when you're, not self-regulating, and what you look like when you're doing the right thing. Some other activities that can improve the executive functions: computer games that focus on, being able to stay focused, pay attention. And again, they all love the shoot 'em bang bang ones, but we're talking also about educational games. Aerobics, martial arts, and yoga that teach you to focus. Mindfulness, playing a musical instrument. School curricula that supports creative thinking and hands-on learning. This little video, I hope it's going to play. Give me a minute.
A child is shown a picture of the sun and asked to say night. And when shown a picture of the moon, he should say day or morning.
What do you say when you see this?
Day.
Yes. And what do you say when you see this?
Night.
Yes.
Day.
The little boy is going on automatic and making mistakes.
Morning. Night.
He was rushing himself. He wasn't taking the time he needed.
Night. Morning.
But giving him time to stop and think helps.
So what I did was to sing this little ditty. Think about the answer, don't tell me. You might think that it's interference, but instead it gives him the time to figure out the answer. Now can you tell me? What do you say?
Morning.
Think about the answer, don't tell me now.
Night.
Okay, so that's an example of that stop and think. Okay, they can I think we've talked about a lot of this. Can predict academic success, school readiness, emotional, social competence, school engagement, positive teacher-child relationships. So basically, we're just talking about executive function is going to affect everything. Children with poorest executive functions gain the most from strategies. So the good news is that if you do have poor executive functions, that all of the kinds of intervention things that we've talked about in research have been shown to improve the executive functions. It helps level the playing field, reduce the achievement gap between more and less advantaged children. Pride in accomplishments increases self-confidence, help children recognize their authentic accomplishments. And I try to keep it authentic with not saying, oh, good work, but rather, I love the way you helped read the story and tell, make me understand what the author was talking about. I love finding out about what Jem did, and it's, was so exciting. So basically, that kind of effusive praise increases their self-confidence that they did it, and they did it in such a great way. Communicate the expectation that a child can be successful if she practices and keeps working. This was kind of tough today on writing, but we're going to get so much better. Continue to increase the challenge each time the child has a success. I gave you those 12 levels of task achievement, so you can break any task that you're having the child do into those multiple levels. And scaffolding is not staying at one level. Scaffolding is moving up every session as high as the child can go, and then moving back down again as the child needs more support. So constantly increasing the challenge each time the child has a success. So basically, anything that involves the child in problem solving, reasoning, planning, why and how questions, problem solving, prediction, experimentation, brainstorming, planning, producing, all the things we've talked about in terms of graphic organizers and storyboards, and talking about the planning of the characters and etc. All of those things are interactions that support developing executive functions. Okay, thank you.